What we're talking about right now is Plan Bay Area 2017, looking forward. But we felt it was important to look back and listen to what people's comments were about the last process, Plan Bay Area 2013, which was approved last July. And we've talked to a number of people, and I'll outline that in a minute. And what we're here today to talk about is some suggested revisions in how we talk about the plan going forward to make it more transparent, easier to understand, and more open and responsive. And that we felt was important to have that discussion before we begin to plan the public engagement for Plan Bay Area 2017. So since the plan was passed, we have talked about this issue of how things went the last time with our administrative committee at their retreat. We've been having a series of delegate meetings with our ABAG delegates across 6 counties so far. We're going to do the next 3 coming up. We've actually met with over 50 delegates in those counties in Alameda, Marin, San Mateo, Santa Clara, Solano, and Sonoma so far. And our regional planners and Miriam have been meeting with planners and staff and public officials in cities around the Bay in PDA site visits and talking to them about what's working, what's not working, and what we could do to help them as they implement the plan. So one of the things we asked in all these meetings is, well, what worked? And a number of people brought up these points. The PDAs helped local governments set the boundaries and place types, the kinds of development they would like to see that reflected the unique character and needs of each of those communities. The plan is not set in stone. It's actually updated every 4 years based on local experience in those PDAs. It also reinforced that all local land use decisions are and remain under local control. 2 other points, that you can nominate new PDAs and PCAs or modify or remove existing ones solely at local discretion before the next plan is done. And finally, the plan created more dialogue among the regional agencies in this process and between local jurisdictions and ABAG's board, you around this table, and staff. So that's what worked. There's a much longer list of what didn't work. And we heard from a number of people that the way we talked about the plan, the sort of insider jargon that planners use, was a barrier to talking to the public about this plan and added to the feeling that this was a top-down planning process. We also heard that people felt they were being sold a predetermined plan that was one-size-fits-all, that it was basically designed to help just the big cities, that it pushed more density everywhere and ignored the needs of smaller towns and rural communities. And finally, on this page, leading off with the 30-year cumulative numbers for the region, starting the conversation that way, only reinforced the fears of top-down, one-size-fits-all planning. And this is a slide you're all very familiar with. This is what we used to start a conversation in many of our meetings. These were the 30-year projections. And for a planner to look at these, you have one reaction. But when you show this to people in the general public and you show a number, 1.1 million new jobs, over 2 million new residents, and 660,000 new housing units, people visualize those numbers all at once. They don't divide that by 30 and do the math and say, well, what is that every year? And then divide that by the 9 counties and different cities. They just see those very large numbers. And I think it's part of the reaction we got was because people were trying to get their head around those numbers. This is a very important map that we used very effectively to talk about several things. One is how much of the Bay Area is not developed yet, where the transportation corridors are and the urban centers are, and most importantly, where the PDAs are. And we were making the point that by focusing the majority of development in less than 5% of the region's land, we would then be able to protect a lot of the open space and the small town character throughout the region. That was what we were trying to convey, but there was a very interesting unconscious message that this map projects. Where is it taken from? This is a satellite image, literally, of the Bay Area. It is by definition a top-down look at the Bay Area. And so even though this was a very important map, it had an unconscious message that we need to be aware of. In addition, Senate Bill 375 and the plan stated over and over again, the plan can't undermine local control. And yet people were worried about that and are still worried about that issue today. We talked about increasing housing in the PDAs, but we showed no new funding. And all of you around this table know that unless we can replace the funds that you used to get from redevelopment, we're not going to be able to build much affordable housing. There's some people who felt the water supply issues and the impact on sea level rise on PDAs was not adequately addressed in this plan. And finally, there was some skepticism, as you all know, about the forecast numbers, particularly with the DOF's numbers, the confusing and lower numbers that were put out, even though eventually the numbers were all ultimately reconciled. And there's more. We didn't provide good visuals of existing locally appropriate development to counter the ugly stack and pack visuals. That picture on the lower left is Wind Cup, and it's pretty ugly. But I think what we didn't have is examples of development in each community that people in those communities would have said is appropriate and well designed. Some people who got involved in the process later on and heard about it later felt there wasn't sufficient time to adequately comment. And people felt we didn't clearly explain the role of each of the regional agencies, not just ABAG and MTC, but BCDC and the Air District and their role in all this. So why were there so many examples of what didn't go well? And we think part of it is that the way we talked about the plan and showed it visually had some very unintended but important consequences. The fact that we began discussions talking about SB 375's mandate, which is a state law, not a local law. The fact that we used these 30-year numbers to talk about what was going to happen, and people thought of those as one big number. And also the fact that we initially called this plan One Bay Area. You all remember these logos, which fed into the whole idea of one size fits all and top-down planning. So going forward, what can we do? What should we do? And we think that we need to create a more accurate, open, and responsive way to talk to the public about this plan and to talk to elected officials and other stakeholders. But the first step is to listen closely to what we've heard and learn from both the criticism and suggestions people have made regarding the last plan. So, for example, instead of starting off with the requirements of Senate Bill 375 and the numbers 2 million or more people, 660,000, what we might say, which is true, and I think a more accurate way to describe this is that change will occur, but it will vary greatly from each county to each city to each PDA. It's going to be different in every single case. But how can cities and towns learn from and support each other in thinking about how they want to change? And how can regional agencies like ABAG support local plans with technical assistance, funding, and advocacy to get the vision, the plan they want for their community? And finally, we can look at how these local plans add up and support regional prosperity. This is a plan that you saw 2 meetings ago, the Grand Boulevard Initiative, and in their presentation, there was one really interesting visual. Their key concept was that human needs have to come first, and they said, always be answering your audience's biggest question: how will this initiative make my life better? And it's a hierarchy of concerns and concepts. The top one is the individual, the person living in that community. The next level of hierarchy is that community and neighborhood they live in. And the thing that they're least interested in is the region. It's important, but it's not what really drives their interest, and we need to remember that. So in rethinking how we talk about the plan, we're not starting from scratch. That's the good news. We've already done this once, and there's a lot of public awareness about it. Plan Bay Area 2013 is our baseline. Now we have a chance to update it. And the key questions going forward are, what are the major opportunities and outcomes that we should be prepared to discuss? What are the key recommendations we have for improving the communications that we do around this plan? And what should our overall goals be? Opportunities are, we have a second chance to point out several things. That plans and planning are a local process done by a local government. And locally nominated PDAs and place types recognize the value and diversity of very different places. And I want to point out that this is jargon in itself, because many people in the public don't know what we mean by PDAs or place types. So we need to do a better job of describing that to the public. Greater transportation choices reduce commuting time for some people and increase family time. And increased flexibility in how communities can meet their housing needs is something we can talk about a lot more. Our recommendations are to start with how will the plan make life better for me and my family, to take it to a personal level, to show locally appropriate activity judged successful by local governments and local residents, to use good locally appropriate visuals for each community, and to use social media and websites to talk about successful PDAs, PCAs, and how local control is maintained over land use. And finally, we need to use consistent, accessible language throughout this process. In terms of our goals in how we talk about this, it's to convey clear, concise information on the plan that avoids technical and planning jargon, to focus on the needs of local residents and communities first, and ask the question, how will this plan make life better for you and your family? To start from there. And if we do that, we hope to inspire confidence in the plan's objectives and ABAG itself and the planning process. And I will stop there. These are our key questions, and I would throw it open for discussion.